Welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're really going deep into the world of rituals, but not just the ones that we, immediately think of, like weddings or graduations.
Right.
We're going to be looking at this incredible book, Understanding Rituals.
Yes.
It's an anthology of essays by anthropologists, and it really takes us all over the world, from India to Indonesia and even to London,
Yeah.
to uncover the hidden meanings of rituals.
It's amazing how this book just kind of like pulls back the curtain on things that we do all the time without even really thinking about. And
Exactly.
the kind of like deeper meanings and functions behind those.
I've got to admit, going into this deep dive, I thought, okay, rituals.
Mm. Mm.
We all know what they are. It's like that awkward Secret Santa at work where, no one really wants to be there.
Right.
Or, those stuffy ceremonies where you're kind of going through the motions, but you're not really sure why.
Yeah, you kind of have the program in your hand.
Yeah, you got the program, but you don't really understand the deeper meaning.
Exactly.
But this book really, just blew that idea out of the water. It shows how these everyday actions, like even how we move and interact with each other,
Yeah.
actually have these deep symbolic meanings.
It's like a hidden language
Yeah.
that we're all speaking,
Yeah.
even if we don't realize it.
Exactly. And one of the first things that really struck me, and the book kind of points this out right away,
Yeah.
is that even anthropologists who, spend their lives studying this stuff,
Right.
they have a hard time defining exactly what a ritual is.
Yes.
It's kind of like we know it when we see it, but we can't really put our finger on it.
Yeah, like there's a sense that there's some kind of special occasion,
Right.
some implicit rules,
Yeah.
some significance.
Yeah, significance and meaning behind it.
Yeah, but even those rules can be really hard to like articulate or define.
Right. I'm thinking about like graduations.
Mm-mm.
Everyone puts on these specific outfits.
Right.
There's this, walking in a particular order, shaking hands in a particular way.
Yeah.
And it's so regimented.
Yeah.
And it all feels so important, but no one's ever really sat me down and said, this is the meaning behind this.
Right. And that's where David Parkin's essay, Ritual as Spatial Direction and Bodily Division, comes in.
Okay.
He makes this argument that rituals aren't just about the things that we do, but also about how we move, what direction we face,
Oh, interesting.
how we position our bodies.
I do like that.
He calls this formulaic spatiality.
Formulaic spatiality. Okay, so it's like there's a certain choreography to
Exactly.
these rituals.
Think about a wedding ceremony.
Yeah.
Walking down an aisle, exchanging rings.
Yeah.
Even facing a certain direction while saying vows.
Mm.
All of these movements are not just random actions.
Right.
They're actually communicating something deeper.
It's like a secret language. I'm even thinking like outside of, really official ceremonies. Even like think about like a dinner party. Like there's this whole choreography to who sits where and how people move around the table.
Yeah.
And who serves the food, and it all feels very orchestrated.
And Parkin actually uses the example of the Giriama people in Kenya and their burial rituals.
Okay.
They have very specific rules about how the body should be positioned, lying on the right side, feet pointing west,
Okay.
eyes facing a particular direction.
Wow.
Like they're using their bodies to communicate with the cosmos.
That's incredible. Like even in death, wow. I'm starting to see how ritual, it's not just about these outward actions.
Right.
It's like almost like a way of communicating with something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, and that brings us to the fascinating way that rituals can shape relationships, especially within families.
Right.
So Charles Malamud has a chapter called Brothers and Sisters in Brahmanic India.
Okay.
And he explores the connection between family ties and ritual duties in Hindu society.
This is where it gets really interesting to me because the book talks about how in Hindu society, the bond between brother and sister is actually really deeply tied to ritual duty.
Yes.
And it's the sister who kind of takes on this almost like priestly role for her brother.
Exactly. And it's not like this is like written down somewhere. It's something that's primarily observed through practice and passed down through generations.
Yeah.
He mentions, several rituals that illustrate this, like Raksha Bandhan.
Yeah, I've seen that. Where the sister ties a thread around her brother's wrist.
Exactly.
It's beautiful.
But that thread isn't just a, sweet symbol.
Yeah.
It actually signifies this bond that transcends the usual boundaries of family. And the sister, by doing this, she's actually performing a priestly function for her brother.
So it's much more than just a nice gesture.
It is.
There's this whole deeper meaning behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So even within a family, you have these like rituals and exchanges that are really adding this whole other layer of meaning and responsibility
Precisely.
to the relationship.
And Malamud even draws a parallel between the gifts that a brother gives his sister during these rituals
Okay.
and the gifts that are traditionally given to priests.
Oh, interesting.
So it really blurs the line between family and priesthood.
That makes you look at like gift giving in a whole new light.
Exactly.
Like what are the deeper meanings behind that?
Right, right.
And speaking of gifts, the next chapter actually takes us even deeper into that.
Yeah,
But with a twist.
with a twist.
Raymond Jamis writes this chapter, The Brother-Married Sister Relationship and Marriage Ceremonies as Sacrificial Rites.
Okay.
And he makes this argument that even marriage ceremonies, which we often see as celebrations,
Right.
can also be understood as acts of sacrifice.
Oh, that's interesting.
Sacrifice at a wedding. That seems a little intense.
I know it sounds pretty intense.
Yeah.
But he's not talking about literal sacrifice.
Okay.
Like, in the way that we might typically think of it.
Right.
But focusing on the Mio people of northern India,
Okay.
he points out that there's this interesting asymmetry
Hmm.
in the exchange of gifts between the bride's and groom's families during the wedding.
Okay.
And he argues that this kind of mirrors the structure of traditional sacrifices.
So are you saying that when, the bride's family is giving these gifts
Mm-hmm.
to the groom's family, it's not just about celebrating the marriage,
Right.
but it's also about like a transfer of power or like an offering?
It could be interpreted that way.
Wow.
Yeah, he's suggesting that the giving of the bride by her family, along with the dowry, could be seen as this symbolic offering to the groom's family,
Really?
which then elevates their status
Wow.
in the community.
This is making me rethink like everything about weddings
Right.
and traditions that we take for granted. It's like there's this much deeper history behind them.
Exactly. And Jamis actually builds on Malamud's work by suggesting that these marriage rituals are really tapping into this broader cultural logic in India that sees even seemingly mundane actions
Right.
as connected to these ancient sacrificial practices.
It's like a window into the past.
It is.
And this idea of uncovering those deeper layers actually takes us to Indonesia with J.D.M. Platenkamp's chapter Transforming Tebelo Ritual.
Mm.
And this one focuses on how the rituals of Tebelo people have been impacted by Christianity, especially those surrounding death.
Mm-hmm.
But before we jump into that, can you give us like a little bit of background on the Tebelo?
Sure.
Like what is their worldview, especially when it comes to death?
So the Tebelo have this really interesting concept called gurumini,
Okay.
which is basically a person's image or their spiritual essence.
Okay.
They believe everyone has both a physical body
Right.
and this gurumini.
Okay.
And life is all about maintaining a balance between the two.
Okay.
And death really disrupts that balance.
I see. So when someone dies, what happens to their gurumini?
So it's believed that when someone dies, the gurumini gets separated from the body,
Okay.
and it's taken by spirits to this realm beyond the living.
Okay.
But here's the interesting part.
Mm-hmm.
The Tebelo believe that the deceased, now incomplete without their gurumini,
Yeah.
will actually try to steal the gurumini of a living relative.
Oh, the dead trying to steal from the living. Okay, that's a little creepy.
I know, it sounds a little creepy, but
Yeah.
it makes sense within their worldview.
Okay.
And it helps to explain why they would traditionally place coins on the deceased's eyes, chest, and hands.
Oh, like to pay them off or something?
Not quite.
Okay.
The coins are meant to kind of confuse the deceased,
Oh.
to prevent them from recognizing their living relatives
Uh-huh.
and stealing their gurumini.
Oh, it's like they're trying to trick the dead.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
It's a way of managing their fear of the unknown and protecting themselves from spiritual harm.
Right, so this seemingly simple act of putting coins on a body
Yeah.
actually has all this deeper significance and meaning.
Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned this is just the first mortuary ritual.
Right.
So what happens next?
So even after the gurumini is gone,
Yeah.
the community still feels the impact of that death.
Mm-hmm.
things start to decay.
Okay.
Crops might fail.
Mm-hmm.
People get sick.
Oh, no.
And this is where the second mortuary ritual comes in.
Okay.
It's all about restoring balance
Mm.
and kind of reintegrating the deceased
Yeah.
into the community in a new way.
This sounds like a really important ritual.
It is.
So tell me about what that looked like before, Christianity started to have an impact.
Sure. So before Christianity, this ritual was a big multi-day event full of symbolism,
Right.
really specific acronyms.
Yeah.
One of the central elements was the circulation of rice
Okay.
and money.
Food, especially rice, it seems like, plays such an important role in rituals across so many cultures.
Yeah, it often represents life, sustenance, connection to ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
In the Cabello ritual, women would bring plates of uncooked rice,
Okay.
and it was symbolically cooked, separating its guramini,
Okay.
which was then offered to the ancestors.
Okay.
And then the cooked rice was returned to the women. And this act was actually seen as essential for the men to participate in the ritual.
Oh, interesting. So it's like this acknowledgement that the living and the dead are connected and they need each other.
Right.
But where does the money fit into all of this?
So the money used was specifically associated with the deceased,
Okay.
often earned through activities like hunting or fishing, which they believed were aided by the ancestral guramini.
Oh.
And during the ritual, this money would be distributed,
Okay.
particularly amongst the women.
So they're sharing the deceased's wealth so that it can continue to provide for the community?
Yes.
This is amazing. It's like this whole intricate system for dealing with loss
Yeah.
and maintaining this balance within the community.
It really highlights the power of ritual to connect us to something larger than ourselves.
Absolutely.
To our ancestors, to the land,
Yeah.
to the forces that shape our lives.
It's really incredible how they woven together like the practical and the spiritual.
Yeah.
It's like those two things aren't really separate for them. But you mentioned that Christianity had a big impact on these rituals.
Yeah, it created this really interesting tension between tradition and change. The Protestant missionaries who came to the region, they preached against ancestor veneration. They called it idolatry.
Okay.
And they emphasized this much more individualistic relationship with God.
So how did the Tabello respond to that? Did they just abandon their old ways?
Not at all. They were actually incredibly resilient and creative in how they kind of integrated these new beliefs with their existing practices.
Okay, that's interesting.
So example, that second mortuary ritual that we were talking about, with its emphasis on ancestor appeasement,
Right.
that had to be significantly transformed.
So what did they do? Did they just stop doing the ritual?
Well, they adapted it in some really ingenious ways.
Okay, how so?
Well, instead of directly distributing the deceased's money, they started holding church options.
Church auction. Okay, wait, I got to hear more about this.
Yeah.
What would they auction off?
Often it would be goods associated with the deceased.
Okay.
But, other items were donated as well.
Okay.
And the money raised would then go to the church.
So they found a way to keep like the essence of that exchange alive,
Yeah.
but channeled it through a new institution.
Exactly.
But did that like completely erase the traditional meaning?
That's a great question.
It seems very different to give money to the church than to share it with your family and community members.
Right. And that speaks to the complexity of cultural change. I mean, while these church options became the new norm, the Tabello didn't entirely abandon that traditional significance of that circulation of money.
Okay.
They still viewed it as a way of honoring the deceased, ensuring the continuity of the community,
Right.
and even maintaining that connection with the ancestors just through a slightly different lens.
So it's like they're translating it into a new language.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I imagine there had to be some internal conflict as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Trying to reconcile these two very different belief systems. I mean, how did they deal with that tension?
Well, they were much more subtle than just, ignoring what the missionaries were saying.
Right.
They found ways to reinterpret their traditions through a Christian lens.
Okay.
So, for instance, some people began to see the Bible itself as a kind of embodiment of ancestral power,
Oh,
a
interesting.
source of protection and guidance
Yeah.
that connected them to this larger spiritual lineage.
It's like they were actively weaving together these different threads into something new.
Exactly. And it's a great example of how cultures are constantly evolving,
Yeah.
taking in new ideas and blending them with their existing traditions.
It's not about one replacing the other.
Right.
It's about this fusion, this creative fusion.
Exactly. And that fluidity and adaptability of ritual is something that we see even more explicitly in Grid Bauman's chapter, Ritual Implicates Others.
Okay.
He takes us to a very different context. Punjabi families living in London.
Okay.
And explores how they navigate the adoption of Western rituals.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me because, like Christmas, for example,
Right.
it's so ubiquitous in Western culture.
Yeah.
You almost can't escape it.
Mm-hmm.
So did these families, like, go all in on Christmas traditions?
It's actually more nuanced than that. Bauman found that these families engaged in what he called selective replication.
Okay, selective replication.
So they adopted certain elements of Christmas, like gift giving, decorating,
Okay.
having special meals,
Yeah.
but they also adapted these practices to fit their own cultural values.
So it's not about assimilation then. It's
Right.
about making it their own.
Exactly, yeah. And he actually shares some really fascinating excerpts from diaries
Oh, wow.
kept by Punjabi teenagers
Okay.
that give us this glimpse into their experiences of Christmas.
Yeah.
And they write about, the excitement of decorating, buying presents, planning these festive meals.
Right.
But there's also some interesting omissions.
Okay. Like what?
Well, for example, Santa Claus, which is so central to a lot of Western Christmas traditions,
Yeah.
is largely absent from their accounts.
That makes sense. I mean, I can't really imagine that whole mythology resonating very strongly. So did they replace Santa with something else?
It seems like that it's kind of shifted the focus more towards family gatherings and the exchange of gifts.
Okay.
But without that kind of elaborate mythology of the magical gift giver.
Yeah, and they probably incorporated their own food and traditions.
Right, exactly. They adapted the Christmas meal itself to include traditional Punjabi dishes.
It's like a hybrid celebration.
Yeah.
Honoring both, their heritage and their adopted culture. Were there any tensions between generations?
There was definitely the sense of negotiation happening within families. The younger generation, having grown up in London, they were more exposed to Western culture and often quite eager to participate in things like Christmas.
Yeah.
While the older generation, though generally accepting sometimes, expressed concerns about losing touch with their cultural identity.
It's that classic immigrant story of trying to find that balance between the new and the old. It's amazing how something like a holiday can become this arena for negotiating those things.
Absolutely.
Did Bauman look at any other celebrations or holidays?
Yes. He also explored how these families navigated birthday celebrations, which presented even more interesting challenges.
Oh, how so?
Well, because traditionally, individual birthdays weren't really a big deal in Punjabi culture.
Okay.
But in London, they found that their children, having been exposed to Western-style birthday parties.
Yeah, through their friends.
Exactly, through school, and their peers had different expectations.
That makes sense, yeah.
So that created some interesting family dynamics.
So did they just give in and throw these big Western-style parties?
Again, like with Christmas, they found ways to adapt rather than just simply adapt.
Okay.
So they might have incorporated elements like cake and presents, but they also brought in their own cultural traditions.
Okay. Like what?
Well, for example, instead of the birthday child blowing out candles, the adults would often feed the child cake.
Oh, interesting.
Signifying a kind of blessing and care.
It's like they're saying, we'll participate in this, but we're going to do it in a way that reflects our own values.
Exactly.
It's amazing how, like, even those small actions can carry so much weight.
Right. And that act of feeding the child cake actually speaks to Bauman's larger point about how Rituals are always, in some way,
Yeah.
about negotiating relationships with the other,
Mm.
even when those others
Yeah.
aren't physically present.
So it's not just about fitting in.
Mm.
It's about defining yourself in relation to those who are different from you.
Right, and that other can take many forms
Mhm.
there.
Mm.
It might be a different cultural group, like
Yeah.
in the case of the Punjabi families in London,
Right.
but it can also be your ancestors, your community, or even abstract ideas about tradition and modernity.
This is making me think about how much of what we do, even just in our daily lives,
Yeah.
is shaped by these, like, unspoken rules,
Mm.
by this dialogue with the other.
It is. It's a constant idea,
Yeah.
whether we realize it or not.
This is fascinating.
Yeah, and it's something that Bauman really emphasizes throughout his work.
Mm.
He argues that rituals aren't just about expressing shared beliefs
Right.
or maintaining social cohesion.
Mm.
They're also about navigating difference, defining boundaries,
Yeah.
negotiating power dynamics.
You know, this whole deep dive
Mm-hmm.
has really changed how I think about rituals.
Yeah,
I'm starting to see them everywhere now.
right.
Not just in these, formal ceremonies, but in everyday interactions, in the ways that we greet each other, celebrate milestones, how we eat, how we dress. It's like this hidden language.
That's such a wonderful insight,
Yeah.
and it really speaks to the power of anthropology
Mm.
to reveal those hidden meanings and motivations
Yeah.
that shape our lives. It's like we're all participating in this grand, interconnected web of rituals,
Huh.
constantly sending and receiving messages,
Mm.
negotiating our place within this larger social and cultural landscape.
Wow, yeah, it's like we're all part of this elaborate dance, constantly trying to figure out the steps, sometimes stumbling, sometimes finding our rhythm, but always moving in relation to others.
Mm.
It's making me wonder if this idea of negotiating with the other through ritual is something that's like unique to diverse societies,
Right.
or if it's a more universal human experience.
It's a fascinating question, and Bauman actually challenges the traditional view
Hmm.
of rituals as primarily expressions of social solidarity within a homogeneous group.
Right.
He suggests that even in seemingly less diverse societies,
Yeah.
rituals are often shaped by the present or the awareness of the other.
So even when a community seems pretty unified, there are still these outside forces at play.
Exactly.
Shaping their rituals. Are there any examples in the book that illustrate this idea in like less diverse societies?
Bauman doesn't go into specific examples from other cultures in great detail in this particular chapter.
Okay.
But he makes this point that even anthropologists who tend to study rituals within the context of a single society
Right.
often overlook the ways in which the other can influence those rituals.
So it's like a blind spot.
Yeah, it's like a blind spot. We're so focused on the internal dynamics
Right.
that we miss the external forces.
Yeah.
And he really encourages us to pay more attention to those external forces,
Okay.
to consider how rituals might be shaped by historical interactions, power dynamics,
Hmm.
even the perceived threat of those outside the immediate community.
It's like zooming out and
Exactly.
looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, how much of our own behavior, our own rituals
Mm-hmm.
are shaped by this kind of unconscious dialogue with the other.
It's a brilliant question,
Yeah.
and it really gets to the heart of what this book is trying to do.
Mhm.
Understanding rituals isn't just about, analyzing rituals
Right.
in some abstract academic way.
Right.
It's about encouraging us to become more aware of the hidden meanings,
Right.
the motivations that shape our own lives,
Yeah.
to see ourselves as active participants
Mhm.
in this ongoing dance of ritual exchange.
This whole conversation has really been an eye-opener for me.
Yeah.
It's like a veil has been lifted.
I love that.
I'm starting to see rituals everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about them in a whole new way.
That's the power of anthropology, isn't
Yeah.
it? It gives us new lenses to view the world, to see the familiar with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
And what's so exciting about this book is that it doesn't just leave us with, theories and concepts.
Right.
It encourages us to apply those insights
Yeah.
to our own lives.
Right. To actually think about the rituals that we do.
Exactly.
And why we do them. Like we've been given a new language, a new way of understanding, not just the rituals of other cultures, but the ones that shape our own lives.
Exactly.
Wow. This deep dive has been amazing.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure talking about this with you.
Likewise. And to our listeners, I hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, inspired you to look at the rituals in your own life, maybe a little bit differently.
Yes.
Remember, rituals aren't just something that people do.
Yeah.
They're all around us,
All around us.
shaping our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, often in ways that we don't even realize.
Absolutely.
And the more we understand about this language of ritual, the more we can appreciate its power, its beauty, its
Yeah.
potential to connect us to something greater than ourselves.
Beautifully said.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.